Here's the big thing that you should be looking for in your text. You should be distinguishing between statements of analysis and statements of fact, or statements of example. These are probably more important. These are going to help you create a sense of why the topic is important, how the topic is defined, what caused it, what it led to. So anything that's interpretive or analytical in nature should kind of jump out at you. That's the kind of statement you should underline, not just a bunch of facts. If you do have statements of fact, like this one, okay, this is about the Congress of Vienna, which was the major treaty negotiation that took place at the end of the French Revolution, the wars of the French Revolution. So these are two statements of analysis about the goals of the powers and what kinds of principles guided their deliberations. And these are some specific facts that illustrate each one of them. So that's the kind of thing that you should be looking for. So when you read this, you could say something like, this demonstrates their balance of power. And then you give the example of the creation of this Kingdom of the Netherlands, which is a larger country than it existed before. Or Edmund Burke's Reflections of the Revolution of France as being an example of conservative philosophy, which is really the philosophy that guided the leaders of the Congress of Vienna. I know you probably think of charts and maps and pictures and photographs and political cartoons as like, oh cool, this page only has like one paragraph of text. I'm going to fly through this reading, okay? I know that's probably how you think of it, and how intimidating it is to look at like 2 pages of double column text with no breakup of anything. But don't just blow off the visuals and think of them as like a nice interruption from the text. Try to connect the visuals to the text. So how does this painting reveal the time period? You know, if you have a map and it's about the Congress of Vienna, then you better look at that map and spend some time with it and make sure that you understand what decisions were made and how they're reflected visually on the map, so that you can see the changing boundaries of Europe. I mean, it's a little easier when you have one country, the United States, when you take U.S. history next year, and what happens is the United States just keeps getting bigger, okay? We don't, like, get conquered by other countries and give back territory. We're just getting bigger, so you just watch. It's easy to put the maps in order. For Europe, it's harder because there's boundaries that are shifting, and some countries are growing, and then they're contracting. So you really need to know that. And it's not just helpful for politics and diplomacy, it's helpful for you getting a sense of the geography of Europe. So do look at the maps, do look at the paintings, do look at the photographs, illustrations, because they help you connect. Because, we do learn more from visual. Some of us are visual learners. So it's not just the abstract interpretation of squiggly lines on a page, it's connecting it to some visual. So if you don't know Romanticism's definition, you could go, oh, I remember that painting or that picture in the textbook by Caspar David Friedrich, and the man and the woman, they were looking at the moon, and there were the gnarly trees in the background, and the moon was, that was a really cool painting, I remember that. Like, oh, that's Romanticism. So that reminds me, like, Romantics really like nature, and they like this idea that human beings were overwhelmed by the sublimity and the awe of nature, and so now you got it. So you're not just remembering text, you're remembering pictures, but if you haven't looked at the pictures, then you can't really go through that process. So 15 to 20% of multiple choice questions in the AP exam have a visual stimulus. That means they have a quote, or they have a chart, or a map, or a political cartoon. And if you don't have the practice of interpreting visuals, that's going to be a lot harder. Okay, so after you finish a unit of study, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks, whatever, I would spend 30 to 45 minutes of like trying to bring together your understanding of that unit. So maybe that's making your standard outline. Maybe it's making a visual map. Okay? So you take a concept or you take an idea and you look at the terms, and you, instead of just making flashcards and memorizing the term, you try to relate the term to some other concept. So you see how these things are organized. If it's just a bunch of facts you're memorizing, you're much less likely to remember them than if you can connect them to something meaningful. Like every time you encounter a fact, the first thing that you do, if you don't know that fact, then usually it's lost. If you say, oh yeah, that reminds me of that topic we just studied in English the other day. That reminds me of that book we read. Now you have a connection. Isn't that one of the best things about, well, okay, one of the most serendipitous things about school is when you're studying something in one class and then it comes up in another class and you're like, oh yeah, we just studied that. Did you ever notice that when you like encounter something for the first time, a person or an idea, and then like 2 days later you encounter it again. You're like, how is it possible that I didn't notice this for 18 years, and then 2 days later I encountered it again? Why is that possible? Why? Because you had no meaningful context, and your eyes just passed over that idea and just dismissed it and walked right on. So if you can connect something to a meaningful concept or idea or theme, you're much more likely to remember it. Plus it makes learning much more fun than if it's just a bunch of facts to memorize. That's boring. Okay? So AP Euro is about the big picture, because you got 450 years of history. Okay, now you got 550 years of history, 560 years of history. You got 25 countries, and so there's no way you can be expected to memorize all the rulers of all the countries. That's not really the goal of the course. It's to identify what the narratives are, the big pictures. So there are some narratives embedded within European history. Okay, so like for example, one of the narratives is the drive for countries to centralize power, to increase their power relative to other countries, to more efficiently use their resources, whether those are human capital or actual material resources or science or technology, because they're constantly competing with each other. Okay, and that's going to take on different manifestations, different chronological periods, and so that's a story that you have to be able to connect to. So if you say, oh, Russia during this period is trying to expand, why? Because Russia wants to westernize. Russia wants to be competitive with the other countries of Europe. It doesn't want to just be on the periphery. It doesn't want to just be part of, you know, what they consider to be the uncivilized area of Europe, and so it's trying to integrate itself into the great powers of Europe, and that's why Peter the Great is important. Not just because he's one ruler that I have to memorize, but Peter the Great is the best example of a Russian ruler who wants to modernize and westernize Russia. Okay? So, try to turn off the part of the brain that's the worrying part of the brain. That's the part of the brain when you're taking a multiple choice test, and you're like, just look at, you know, question number 26, you're like, oh yeah, we just studied this. C is the answer. And then you go back and you're like, oh, maybe C isn't the answer. Maybe this question's harder than I thought it was. Maybe it's a trick question. I think it's B. And then you change it. And then you get it wrong. Okay? You ever done that before? How many of you ever done that? You changed an answer that was right. I'm convinced that the part that knew the answer is the part of your brain that really understood it. The part that questioned it has nothing to do with learning. That's the part that's the anxiety part that's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't go with that answer. Okay, so for this here, all right, what I did is I took basically your kind of standard 7-8 page reading in the textbook. This happens to be about the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, the reasons why Great Britain was the first country to industrialize, and some of the early industries that were mechanized. So what I did at the end, which is in the first page, is I made an outline of what I just read. So basically it was the origins, why Great Britain, what were the key industries, and then the culmination of this, which is known as the Crystal Palace Exhibition in 1851. So that's the barest of outlines. That took me basically 20 seconds. And then in the introduction, which is really important because it's going to give you the framework of the chapter, I basically made some margin notes on the side. So why is the Industrial Revolution important? Its comparison to the French Revolution as an event in European history, the fact that it's about the creation of new forms of energy and power, how it increased productivity. I underlined the definition of the Industrial Revolution, so that would be a passage that I would be inclined to go back and reread. You don't want to reread your entire textbook studying for a unit test, but maybe if there are important statements of definition or analysis and interpretation, those are the ones you should go back and read. I also know the fact that it led to urbanization and other developments that will come later that it's related to, like imperialism, transportation developments, and the emergence of new kinds of classes. So I even made a note to myself, I should be able to state the significance of the Industrial Revolution in one sentence, concisely, clearly, and with some information, some specifics. And then I just went through and I identified why Great Britain was the first country to industrialize. And so the first thing on the bottom of that page there is the Agricultural Revolution. And then I just, you know, you don't have to put these little A, B, and C there, but each one of these statements I underlined because those were effects of the Agricultural Revolution on Great Britain. And then the next one is about Great Britain's supply of capital, and then about the social orientation toward the profit motive, and then access to raw materials, and then government support of the economy. And so basically, I have created an outline in my own mind of each one of the factors that led Great Britain to industrialize. By the way, do you think that was a potential essay question on the AP exam? Analyze the factors that accounts for Great Britain's lead in the Industrial Revolution. Do you think that would be a potential essay question? Oh yeah. So if you've already formulated it right here, just by reading these 2 pages, you're ahead of the game. And then these documents here, your textbook has documents in it, I wouldn't blow those off either. I'd think about how does this relate to the larger themes of the unit. So use the primary sources as a way to gain some specific material that links with the key concepts and the themes of a particular unit. I also even made notes about the pictures. So to me, everything in the chapter is meaningful. And if you aren't sure why, then you should think about why is this included in the chapter? Why was this picture, why was this political cartoon included in the chapter? So that's the fun of learning, is make it meaningful. You're looking for meaning in the world around you. So create the meaning, impose the meaning through some kind of, analytical process, instead of just thinking this is a bunch of facts. Okay? So I'll let you look at the rest of this on your own, but basically, you don't have to mimic exactly what I did here, but you want to try something like this. So practice it tonight. If you're reading in your textbook, go ahead and try to see if you can create some of the intellectual framework. Before everybody runs off, any questions about things like note-taking, studying, preparing for essay tests, multiple choice tests, anything? Any questions? Yes. Ryan. You mean answering the questions? I think it really depends on you. I guess I'd be inclined to do it as I read, because then it's just requiring me to remember more at the end, plus it'll reinforce immediately after I read it why it's important. So I guess I'd be inclined to do that. I certainly wouldn't do 5 or 6 entire reading guides after reading, 50 pages of the textbook. That's just not a good practice. Other questions? No? Okay. Thanks for stopping by. Good luck.